What happens when an SOS signal from a dying planet attracts not saviors, but an ancient force capable of unraveling reality itself? You won't believe how far humanity must go to survive, and what one girl sacrifices to save billions. The stars above Deathworld flickered weakly, their light drowned out by the oppressive haze of storms that never ceased. It was a place where life itself seemed to fight against existence, clawing through acid rain and toxic winds just to survive another day. Yet, even here, intelligence found a way. The Deathworlders, hardened survivors who had carved civilizations from sheer rock and despair, thrived not because they were lucky, but because they refused to die. They built cities beneath domes of reinforced glass, mined resources from rivers of molten metal, and waged endless wars over scraps of habitable land. Their society was brutal, efficient, and merciless, but it worked. Until the signal came. Deathworld's history was written in blood and fire. Centuries ago, humanity had crash-landed here after their colony ship malfunctioned during an interstellar voyage. Cut off from Earth and stranded on a planet that seemed determined to kill them, they adapted or perished. Over generations, they evolved physically and culturally, developing thicker skin to withstand acidic downpours and respiratory systems capable of filtering toxic air. Technology advanced out of necessity rather than curiosity, creating tools designed solely for survival. Wars erupted frequently, driven by competition for limited resources and ideological differences. Despite the constant strife, however, a fragile sense of order emerged under the leadership of the Council of Survival, a governing body tasked with making decisions critical to the species' longevity. But stability is a luxury rarely afforded to those living on the edge of extinction. One fateful evening, as lightning storms raged across the horizon, a single transmission echoed across the void, picked up by every receiver on the planet at once. An SOS, distorted yet unmistakable. "Help us," it pleaded over and over again. At first, the leaders dismissed it as interference, a trick of the electromagnetic storms that plagued their skies. But then the coordinates appeared, coordinates pointing to their own system. Panic spread faster than any plague could have. Something knew they existed. Something had sent for them. The implications were staggering. For decades, the Deathworlders operated under the assumption that they were alone in their corner of the galaxy, isolated by both distance and circumstance. Now, evidence suggested otherwise. Was this a test? A trap? Or perhaps a cry for aid from another doomed civilization? Whatever the case, ignoring it wasn't an option, not when the alternative might be complete annihilation. We only begin to scratch the surface of this mystery, but trust me when I say, things are about to get much worse. Ominous forces loom closer, and the fate of Deathworld hangs precariously in the balance. Stay with us, you won't want to miss what happens next. Counselor Vera stood before the assembly chamber, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This isn't paranoia," she snapped, slamming her fist onto the table. "Whatever sent that signal knows we're here. If we ignore it, we risk inviting destruction." Her words hung heavy in the air, met with murmurs of dissent and fear. Others argued that responding would be suicide, that acknowledging their presence might draw predators far worse than anything they'd faced before. But Vera was adamant. She ordered the construction of a fleet, small but formidable, tasked with investigating the source of the SOS. Meanwhile, whispers of rebellion stirred among the lower classes. Rumors spread that the council cared more about preserving power than protecting the people. Riots erupted in the streets, fueled by desperation and distrust. Amidst the turmoil, a young engineer named Kale emerged as an unlikely leader. He wasn't a soldier or a politician. He was simply a man trying to protect his family. When he discovered evidence suggesting the signal originated from within their own solar system, he realized the truth. Someone or something had been watching them all along. The question now was whether humanity would find answers or oblivion. We've barely scratched the surface of this tale, but believe me, the stakes are higher than you can imagine. Stick around to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Counselor Vera stood before the assembly chamber, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This isn't paranoia," she snapped, slamming her fist onto the table. "Whatever sent that signal knows we're here. If we ignore it, we risk inviting destruction." Her words hung heavy in the air, met with murmurs of dissent and fear. Others argued that responding would be suicide, that acknowledging their presence might draw predators far worse than anything they'd faced before. But Vera was adamant. She ordered the construction of a fleet, small but formidable, tasked with investigating the source of the SOS. Vera's decision wasn't made lightly. As a child, she'd lost her parents to one of the planet's infamous acid storms, leaving her orphaned and alone. That tragedy forged her into the steely, pragmatic leader she was today. She understood better than anyone the fragility of life on Deathworld, and the importance of taking calculated risks to ensure its continuation. Still, her resolve faced stiff opposition from other council members, many of whom viewed her plan as reckless and foolhardy. Meanwhile, whispers of rebellion stirred among the lower classes. Rumors spread that the council cared more about preserving power than protecting the people. Riots erupted in the streets, fueled by desperation and distrust. Citizens clashed with enforcers, barricades went up around government buildings, and makeshift militias formed overnight. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anger and uncertainty. Amidst the turmoil, a young engineer named Kale emerged as an unlikely leader. He wasn't a soldier or a politician. He was simply a man trying to protect his family. Born into poverty, Kale had clawed his way out of the slums through sheer determination and ingenuity. His inventions, ranging from portable water purifiers to modular shelters, had saved countless lives during the planet's harshest seasons. Yet despite his accomplishments, he remained humble, preferring to work quietly behind the scenes rather than seek recognition. When Kale intercepted fragments of data suggesting the signal originated from within their own solar system, he realized the truth. Someone or something had been watching them all along. The discovery shook him to his core. How long had they been monitored? By whom? And why? Determined to uncover answers, he began piecing together clues hidden in the transmission's metadata. Each revelation brought him closer to understanding the scope of the threat, but also deeper into danger. The question now was whether humanity would find answers or oblivion. We've barely scratched the surface of this tale, but believe me, the stakes are higher than you can imagine. Stick around to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. The fleet launched under cover of night, slipping past orbital defenses and into the black expanse beyond Deathworld's atmosphere. Piloted by volunteers, some brave, others desperate, they ventured toward the coordinates embedded in the SOS. Captain Soren, a grizzled veteran of countless skirmishes, led the mission. His ship, the Iron Resolve Dash, served as both flagship and fortress, bristling with weapons designed to repel any threat. Yet even he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at his gut. Soren's reputation preceded him. A decorated officer with decades of service under his belt, he had earned both respect and fear among his peers. Known for his unyielding discipline and tactical brilliance, he was also notorious for his cold pragmatism. To Soren, every decision boiled down to numbers. How many lives could be saved versus how many sacrificed? This mindset made him an effective leader but left him emotionally detached, a trait that often alienated those closest to him. Now, as he gazed out at the endless void, he felt a rare flicker of doubt. What if this mission ended not in triumph but in catastrophe? The journey took weeks, during which time tensions aboard the vessels simmered dangerously close to boiling over. Supplies dwindled, tempers flared, and strange phenomena began to plague the expedition. Instruments malfunctioned without explanation. Navigation systems displayed phantom readings, showing planets and stars that didn't exist. Communication arrays crackled with static, occasionally punctuated by what sounded like distorted voices speaking in languages no one recognized. Crew members reported hearing whispers in empty corridors. At first, these accounts were dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations or tricks of acoustics. But when multiple individuals described identical experiences, voices murmuring warnings, pleading for help, or issuing cryptic commands, the dismissals grew harder to sustain. Shadows moved where no light should fall, darting just beyond the edge of vision. Sleep became elusive, replaced by restless nights filled with vivid dreams of collapsing worlds and faceless entities reaching out from the darkness. When they finally reached the designated location, there was nothing, just empty space stretching endlessly in every direction. Or so it seemed. Hidden beneath layers of quantum distortion lay a structure unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Towering spires of obsidian stretched impossibly high, their surfaces etched with glyphs that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly glow. These symbols shifted constantly, rearranging themselves into patterns too complex for human comprehension. Some crew members swore they saw faces within the glyphs, faces that watched them with malevolent intent. As the ships approached, a deafening roar tore through the vacuum, shaking hulls and shattering eardrums. Whatever dwelled inside had awakened, and it knew they were there. Panic rippled through the fleet as alarms blared and lights flickered erratically. For a moment, it felt as though reality itself was unraveling, the fabric of space-time warping around them. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence. Captain Soren ordered a full diagnostic of all systems, though deep down he suspected the truth. They weren't dealing with conventional physics anymore. This was something else entirely, a force beyond their understanding. And they had only scratched the surface. Kale stared at the readings streaming across his console, his hands trembling slightly despite his best efforts to remain calm. The structure emitted frequencies that defied conventional physics, bending reality itself. Time slowed near its edges, and gravity warped unpredictably, threatening to tear the fleet apart. Against Soren's orders, Kale insisted on deploying a probe to gather data. The machine barely made it 10 meters before being consumed by a burst of energy that left nothing but static in its wake. Still, fragments of information filtered back, enough to confirm their worst fears. This wasn't just some derelict relic floating aimlessly through space. It was alive. Back on Deathworld, panic escalated into outright hysteria. News of the fleet's discovery leaked, sparking riots that overwhelmed what little remained of the government's authority. Vera struggled to maintain order, issuing decrees that went largely ignored. Meanwhile, reports poured in of bizarre occurrences across the planet. Animals behaving erratically, crops failing overnight, entire villages vanishing without a trace. Some claimed these events were unrelated, mere coincidences born of superstition. Others believed they signaled the beginning of something far greater and far darker. As the days passed, it became increasingly clear that whatever had awakened in the depths of space was already reaching out, touching lives in ways no one fully understood. Kale stared at the readings streaming across his console, his hands trembling slightly despite his best efforts to remain calm. The structure emitted frequencies that defied conventional physics, bending reality itself. Time slowed near its edges, and gravity warped unpredictably, threatening to tear the fleet apart. Against Soren's orders, Kale insisted on deploying a probe to gather data. Kale's insistence stemmed not from recklessness but from desperation. He had spent years studying anomalies, poring over fragmented transmissions and analyzing patterns in cosmic radiation. This structure resonated with something he'd seen before, anomalies buried deep within Deathworld's own archives. If he could gather enough data, he might unlock the key to understanding not just the entity before them but the mysterious forces shaping their world. The probe launch was fraught with tension. Engineers worked feverishly to stabilize the vessel's trajectory, compensating for the erratic gravitational fields surrounding the structure. When the probe finally detached, cheers erupted briefly before giving way to stunned silence. Within moments, The machine vanished, consumed by a burst of energy that left nothing but static in its wake. Still, fragments of information filtered back, enough to confirm their worst fears. This wasn't just some derelict relic floating aimlessly through space. It was alive. Data streamed into Kale's console, overwhelming his systems with raw, unprocessed information. Glyphs scrolled across his screen, pulsating with colors that seemed to shift depending on the angle of observation. Mathematical equations appeared alongside biological schematics, suggesting a form of intelligence capable of existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Kale's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all, his thoughts colliding in a storm of possibilities. Inside the obsidian monolith, the crew of the Iron Resolve ventured cautiously, their footsteps echoing eerily in the vast emptiness. The air felt thick, almost liquid, pressing against their suits with unnatural weight. Every movement required effort, as though gravity itself conspired to keep them rooted in place. Glyphs lining the walls shifted subtly as they moved, rearranging themselves into patterns that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Some crew members swore they saw shapes within the glyphs, eyes watching them, mouths twisting into silent screams. Lieutenant Mara, the team's xenobiologist, speculated aloud that the structure might be sentient, a living organism masquerading as architecture. "What if it's not just a building?" she mused, her voice trembling slightly. "What if it's alive? What if we're walking through its veins or its mind?" Her theory gained credence when one of the engineers accidentally triggered a trap, causing a section of the floor to collapse into a writhing mass of tendrils. These appendages were unlike anything they'd ever seen, semi-transparent, glowing faintly with an inner light, and exuding a low hum that resonated in their bones. Panic erupted as the tendrils lashed out, wrapping around anyone who came too close. Captain Soren barked orders, directing his team to retreat while laying down suppressive fire. Energy weapons proved ineffective. Bullets passed harmlessly through the tendrils, dissipating into bursts of harmless sparks. Only quick thinking saved them. One of the engineers deployed a containment field generator, creating a temporary barrier that allowed the group to escape. They barely escaped with their lives, retreating deeper into the labyrinth. As they fled, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that the structure was testing them, or perhaps playing with them. Each corridor led to new horrors. Walls that bled black ichor, floors that shifted like liquid mercury, and ceilings that dripped crystalline shards sharp enough to pierce armor. The environment seemed designed to disorient and terrify, pushing them to their limits both physically and mentally. Along the way, they uncovered artifacts hinting at the structure's purpose, devices capable of manipulating matter on a molecular level, records detailing experiments conducted on countless species, and warnings scrawled in languages long dead. One artifact resembled a crystalline sphere etched with fractal patterns. When activated, it projected holograms of alien civilizations, some thriving, others reduced to ash. Another device emitted pulses of energy that temporarily disrupted the team's neural implants, flooding their minds with fragmented memories of events they hadn't experienced. Each discovery raised more questions than answers, painting a picture of an intelligence older than galaxies themselves. Yet none prepared them for what awaited at the heart of the monolith. A chamber pulsating with raw energy, housing something neither living nor dead. The entity filled the room, its form constantly shifting between states of solidity and transparency. It radiated power so intense that even standing near it caused physical pain. Before they could react, the entity spoke. Not in words, but in sensations that flooded their minds with visions of infinite suffering. Entire worlds burned before their eyes, civilizations collapsing under the weight of their own hubris. They saw themselves reflected in these apocalypses, their actions mirrored back as acts of arrogance and greed. The message was clear. They were being judged and found wanting. We're approaching the climax of this harrowing saga, and let me tell you, the revelations ahead will leave you breathless. Don't look away now. The entity's voice resonated within their skulls, a cacophony of screams and whispers intertwined. It revealed itself as a guardian, an ancient being tasked with maintaining balance across the cosmos. Its presence was overwhelming, filling the chamber with a palpable sense of dread. Crew members clutched their heads, doubling over as waves of nausea and vertigo washed over them. Through the chaos, the entity began to communicate, not in language but in sensations that bypassed traditional senses entirely. Billions of years ago, it explained, civilizations rose and fell like waves upon a shore, each leaving scars upon the fabric of reality. Wars, technological advancements, even simple acts of curiosity, all left imprints that rippled outward, destabilizing the delicate balance of existence. To prevent further damage, the Guardians erected barriers between dimensions, isolating species until they proved worthy of coexistence. These barriers weren't cruel. They were necessary, akin to quarantining a sick patient to protect the healthy. The Deathworlders, however, had breached those barriers unknowingly, their very survival disrupting the delicate equilibrium. Their crash landing on the planet eons ago had created ripples that spread far beyond their solar system, destabilizing regions of space-time and awakening dormant forces. For this transgression, they would be eradicated. Captain Soren stepped forward, his voice steady despite the terror coursing through him. If we've caused harm, then tell us how to fix it. Give us a chance to make amends. But the entity remained unmoved, its response cold and unyielding. Extinction was inevitable unless they could demonstrate value beyond mere survival. Kale, driven by instinct rather than reason, attempted to reason with the entity. "We didn't mean to cause harm," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the strain. "Give us a chance to prove ourselves." His words carried a sincerity that cut through the oppressive atmosphere, catching the attention of the entity. For a brief moment, the cacophony subsided, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. Then the entity issued a challenge. Solve the riddle inscribed on the chamber walls or face annihilation. The glyphs shifted once more, forming a complex puzzle that defied logic and intuition. Patterns overlapped, colors shifted, and symbols rearranged themselves faster than the human eye could process. Solving it would require not just intellect but creativity, empathy, and collaboration. With time running out, the crew scrambled to decipher the cryptic symbols, their minds straining against the overwhelming pressure. Failure meant certain doom, not just for them but for everyone back home. Success offered a slim hope of redemption. Tensions flared as arguments broke out over strategy. Some advocated brute force, attempting to override the mechanism with sheer computational power. Others argued for patience, urging the team to focus on understanding the underlying principles behind the riddle. Kale took charge, synthesizing ideas from both sides. He divided the team into groups, assigning tasks based on individual strengths. Engineers worked on stabilizing the environment, preventing further traps from activating. Scientists analyzed the glyphs, searching for patterns or clues buried within their complexity. Meanwhile, Kale himself focused on interpreting the emotional undertones of the puzzle, convinced that the solution lay not in logic alone but in emotion. The clock ticked relentlessly onward, each second bringing them closer to catastrophe. As sweat dripped down their faces and exhaustion set in, the stakes became painfully clear. Failure wasn't an option, not when the fate of an entire world rested on their shoulders. As the team raced against time, fractures began to form within their ranks. Fear bred mistrust, and mistrust bred conflict. Voices rose in heated debates, accusations flying like shrapnel. Some argued that sacrificing a few was necessary to save the many. Others refused to abandon anyone, even if it meant jeopardizing the entire mission. The divide wasn't just ideological, it was personal. Years of shared hardship couldn't shield them from the raw emotions bubbling to the surface. Lieutenant Mara, whose theories about the structure's sentience had proven eerily accurate, accused Captain Soren of withholding critical information. "You knew," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. You knew what we were dealing with long before we set foot in this nightmare. Her words struck a nerve, and Soren's usual stoicism cracked. He lunged at her, grabbing her by the collar of her suit. The two grappled, their movements clumsy but fueled by rage. Crew members intervened, pulling them apart before the altercation escalated further. Both were left battered and bruised, their relationship irreparably damaged. The incident cast a shadow over the group, eroding morale and slowing progress. Trust, the glue holding them together, was crumbling faster than anyone could repair it. Yet amidst the chaos, Cale remained focused. While others argued or wallowed in despair, he studied the glyphs obsessively, searching for patterns that might offer a solution. His breakthrough came unexpectedly. A pattern resembling the molecular structure of water. Water, a substance so simple yet fundamental to life. Its properties, fluidity, adaptability, resilience, mirrored the very qualities the entity seemed to value. Realizing its significance, Cale proposed using the ship's quantum core to simulate the conditions required to unlock the chamber's secrets. The core, designed to stabilize dimensional rifts, could theoretically replicate the harmonics needed to resonate with the glyphs. The plan was risky, potentially catastrophic if executed improperly. Overloading the core could destabilize not just the monolith but the entire region of space surrounding it. But with no other options available, they had no choice but to proceed. Cale presented his findings to the group, his voice steady despite the weight of the decision. If we don't try, we've already lost, he said. Reluctantly, Captain Soren gave the order to prepare the simulation. Back on Deathworld, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Entire continents succumbed to environmental collapse, ecosystems unraveling as toxic storms intensified and rivers of molten metal overflowed their banks. Refugees poured into overcrowded shelters, their faces etched with despair. Supplies dwindled, tempers flared, and whispers of rebellion grew louder. Above ground, those who remained faced horrors beyond comprehension. Creatures born of nightmares roaming freely, preying on anything that moved. These abominations defied classification, their forms shifting unpredictably as though they existed in multiple states simultaneously. Hope dwindled with each passing hour, replaced by a creeping sense of inevitability. Rumors spread that the fleet had failed, that the entity had consumed them all. Others clung to the belief that salvation was still possible, praying for a miracle that seemed increasingly unlikely. The simulation commenced with a deafening hum, vibrations rippling through the ship like tremors before an earthquake. The quantum core pulsed with energy, its containment fields straining under the immense load. Inside the chamber, the glyphs lit up in sequence, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Their glow intensified, bathing the room in hues of blue and violet, creating an almost hypnotic effect. For a moment, it seemed as though the gamble might pay off. The glyphs aligned perfectly, their patterns forming a cohesive whole that resonated with the simulated frequencies. Then disaster struck. A surge of energy overloaded the system, cascading through the ship like a tidal wave. Conduits burst, spraying arcs of electricity that arced across the ceiling. Alarms blared deafeningly, their shrill tones piercing eardrums. Lights flickered erratically, plunging sections of the ship into darkness before surging back to life. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, showering the crew with shards of molten metal. Chaos reigned supreme as crew members scrambled to contain the damage, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Captain Soren barked orders, directing teams to stabilize critical systems while others worked to isolate the core. But the situation spiraled out of control too quickly. Fire spread through corridors, forcing evacuations and cutting off access to key areas. Panic gripped the survivors, their training forgotten in the face of overwhelming catastrophe. Through the pandemonium, Cale pressed forward, determined to complete the task regardless of cost. Guided by intuition honed through years of problem-solving, he adjusted the parameters manually, recalibrating the simulation in real time. His hands moved with practiced precision, fingers flying over controls as sweat dripped from his brow, stinging his eyes. Every second felt like an eternity, each adjustment bringing them closer to either salvation or destruction. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chamber stabilized. The glyphs ceased their frenetic dance, settling into a coherent pattern that glowed softly with an ethereal light. The entity acknowledged their success, though its tone remained indifferent. "You have proven yourselves clever," it intoned, its voice reverberating through the chamber. But cleverness alone does not equate to worthiness. The statement hung heavy in the air, its implications clear. Intelligence and ingenuity weren't enough. They would need to demonstrate something deeper, something more profound. What that was, however, remained unclear. Inside the obsidian monolith, the crew of the Iron Resolve waited anxiously for the entity's next move. The chamber remained eerily silent, the glyphs glowing faintly as though holding their breath. Having solved the riddle of the glyphs, they had earned a temporary reprieve, but the entity's indifference suggested their trial was far from over. Its presence loomed larger than ever, a suffocating weight pressing down on them. Then it spoke again, its voice resonating not just in their minds but in the very fabric of the chamber itself. The walls vibrated with each syllable, the air thickening until it felt like wading through molasses. "Cleverness is fleeting," it intoned, its words dripping with an ancient, implacable wisdom. "Prove now your capacity for compassion." The word hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and unyielding. Compassion, a concept so simple yet profoundly complex. How could they possibly convey such an abstract notion to a being whose existence spanned eons? To the entity, emotions might be foreign, alien constructs incomprehensible in their nuance. Yet here they were, tasked with proving something that defied quantification. Ideas flowed freely, each more desperate than the last. Lieutenant Mara suggested recreating acts of kindness directly within the chamber, offering aid to injured crew members or sharing limited supplies. Others argued this would seem trivial, even performative, to a being of such immense power. Captain Soren proposed constructing a symbolic gesture, building a monument within the chamber to represent unity and sacrifice. But Kale, ever the pragmatist, dismissed these ideas as insufficient. "Symbols aren't enough," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to show it something real, something that reflects who we are at our best." He proposed creating a holographic representation of humanity's greatest achievements, not technological marvels, but moments of unity and cooperation. These weren't the feats of war or conquest that defined many civilizations. These were acts of selflessness, of individuals and communities coming together to overcome adversity. Thus began a feverish effort to compile footage showcasing acts of goodwill throughout history. Engineers worked tirelessly to interface with the ship's archives, pulling records of rescues during natural disasters, communities rebuilding after devastation, and individuals risking their lives to aid strangers. One clip showed a group of farmers working together to save crops from an impending storm. Another depicted doctors performing surgeries under makeshift conditions to treat victims of a catastrophic collapse. Each clip carried weight. Every image told a story. As the montage played, the entity observed silently, its form shifting imperceptibly. At times, it seemed almost curious, its massive shape rippling like liquid shadow. Other times, it exuded an aura of detached judgment, as though weighing the worth of their efforts against some unknowable standard. The crew held their breath, hearts pounding in unison as the final images flickered across the chamber walls. When the presentation concluded, silence enveloped the chamber. Seconds stretched into minutes, anticipation hanging thick in the air. The glyphs dimmed slightly, their glow softening as though mirroring the mood. Then, slowly, the entity spoke. "Compassion is rare. Rarer still is the ability to recognize its value." You have earned my respect." Relief washed over the crew, mingling with exhaustion and disbelief. Tears streamed down faces, shoulders sagged, and hands trembled as the weight of what they'd accomplished sank in. They had done the impossible, not through brute force or intellect alone, but through vulnerability, empathy, and a shared determination to prove their worth. But the victory was bittersweet. The entity granted them safe passage back to Deathworld, along with a stern warning. Their actions would be monitored, and any further disruptions to the balance of existence would result in swift and merciless punishment. As they prepared to leave the monolith, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter was only the beginning of something far greater and far more uncertain. Victory tasted bittersweet. Though spared from immediate destruction, the Deathworlders faced an uncertain future. The entity granted them a reprieve, allowing them to return home and rebuild. However, it imposed strict limitations. No further expansion beyond their solar system, no attempts to contact other civilizations, and regular inspections to ensure compliance. Failure to adhere to these terms would result in swift and merciless punishment. Grateful yet wary, the survivors limped back to their ravaged world, carrying both hope and dread in equal measure. The journey home was somber, marked by quiet reflection rather than celebration. Crew members stared out at the stars, their minds replaying the events of the past weeks. They had faced annihilation and emerged victorious. But at what cost? Lives had been lost, relationships shattered, and trust eroded. The scars ran deep, both physical and emotional. Upon returning, they found Deathworld in even worse condition than before. Entire continents lay barren, their ecosystems irreparably damaged by the entity's influence. Toxic storms raged unchecked, swallowing cities whole and forcing millions underground. Refugees crowded into overcrowded shelters, their faces gaunt and hollow. Supplies were scarce, and tensions flared as desperation turned to anger. Rumors spread that the fleet had failed, that the entity had consumed them all, or worse, that their actions had somehow worsened the situation. Reconstruction proved arduous, requiring sacrifices few were willing to make. Resources were scarce, morale lower still. Yet amidst the ruins, seeds of renewal began to sprout. Communities banded together, pooling knowledge and labor to restore basic infrastructure. Engineers worked tirelessly to repair damaged domes. Farmers experimented with hardy crops capable of surviving the harsh environment, and medics tended to the sick and injured despite dwindling supplies. Stories of heroism inspired new generations, fostering a spirit of resilience that transcended generations. Tales of Kale's ingenuity, Captain Soren's leadership, and Lieutenant Mara's bravery became legends whispered around campfires. Children grew up hearing about the day humanity stood on the brink of extinction and refused to give in. Slowly but surely, Deathworld transformed, not into what it once was, but something stronger, wiser. Cities rebuilt with sustainability in mind, prioritizing harmony with the planet rather than domination over it. Education systems emphasized empathy and cooperation, teaching future generations the importance of balance, not just among themselves, but with the universe at large. As the years passed, memories of the encounter faded, becoming legends whispered around campfires. But the lessons endured, etched indelibly into the collective consciousness. Never again would they take survival for granted. Never again would they underestimate the power of compassion. Yet beneath the surface, questions lingered. What had truly happened inside the monolith? Had they truly earned the entity's respect, or merely delayed the inevitable? And most importantly, what role did Deathworld play in the grand tapestry of existence? For now, there were no answers, only the quiet determination to endure and to hope. Years turned into decades, and the scars of the past began to fade, though never completely. Deathworld had been reshaped not just physically but culturally. The once fragmented societies now shared a common ethos: survival through unity. Gone were the days of petty squabbles over resources or ideological differences. In their place stood a collective determination to endure, to adapt, and to thrive despite the odds. Kale, who had returned a reluctant hero, became an architect of this new era. Though he shunned the title, his influence was undeniable. He spearheaded projects to rebuild infrastructure, establish sustainable energy systems, and foster education programs focused on empathy and cooperation. Schools taught children about the lessons learned from the monolith's trial, emphasizing the importance of compassion and collaboration. Farmers adopted new techniques designed to work with the planet rather than against it, cultivating crops that could withstand the harsh environment while minimizing ecological damage. Engineers developed modular technologies capable of adapting to the ever-changing conditions, ensuring that progress wouldn't come at the cost of stability. His leadership style was unconventional. He avoided titles and hierarchy, preferring to lead by example. Kale worked alongside laborers, scientists, and politicians alike, rolling up his sleeves and diving into the trenches whenever necessary. His humility earned him respect, but it was his vision that truly inspired others. He spoke often of the entity's words, reminding people that cleverness alone wasn't enough to ensure survival. "We're more than our tools," he would say during public addresses. "We're defined by how we treat each other and how we treat the world around us." Yet peace is rarely permanent in a universe as vast and unpredictable as theirs. Strange phenomena continued to plague the planet, subtle yet persistent reminders that the entity's influence lingered. Crops failed in patterns too precise to be natural, entire fields wilting overnight as though drained of life. Animals migrated en masse without explanation, abandoning habitats that had sustained them for generations. Power grids flickered erratically, disrupting even the most advanced technology. These incidents weren't isolated. They occurred simultaneously across continents, suggesting coordination beyond human comprehension. Scientists scrambled to understand these anomalies, their findings pointing toward something they could scarcely comprehend: a lingering presence, faint but undeniable, woven into the fabric of reality itself. Instruments detected fluctuations in quantum fields, gravitational anomalies, and bursts of energy that defied conventional physics. Theories abounded. Some suggested residual fragments of the entity remained embedded in the planet's core, dormant until triggered by some unknown event. Others speculated that the entity's judgment hadn't ended, that it continued to monitor them, testing their resolve and probing for weaknesses in their newfound unity. Rumors spread among the populace, whispered in hushed tones late at night. Parents warned children not to venture too far from home, citing stories of villages swallowed whole by sudden sinkholes or forests consumed by inexplicable wildfires. Conspiracy theorists claimed the government was hiding the truth, accusing Counselor Vera and her advisors of making secret deals with the entity to secure their own survival. Skeptics dismissed these claims as paranoia, but even they couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease that permeated daily life. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: Deathworld was no longer alone. The entity's shadow loomed large, a constant reminder that their existence hung by a thread. For now, the anomalies remained minor, irritating but survivable. But deep down, everyone knew the calm wouldn't last forever. Somewhere, somehow, another storm was brewing. The first sign of trouble came during the annual Harvest Festival, a celebration marking the rebirth of agriculture after years of scarcity. It was meant to be a time of joy and renewal, a testament to humanity's resilience in the face of adversity. Thousands gathered in the central plaza, their faces illuminated by strings of bioluminescent lights draped between towering structures. Stalls lined the streets, offering fresh produce, handmade crafts, and music played on instruments crafted from salvaged materials. Children laughed as they chased each other through the crowd, while elders shared stories of hardship overcome and lessons learned. Then, without warning, the lights flickered erratically before going dark entirely. A low hum filled the air, resonating deep within the chests of those present. At first, it was barely noticeable, a faint vibration that might have been mistaken for distant machinery. But within seconds, it grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like the very ground beneath their feet was trembling. People exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to dismiss the disturbance as a technical glitch or flee in panic. Before anyone could decide, the ground split open with a deafening crack, revealing a chasm glowing with an eerie blue light. The fissure widened rapidly, swallowing everything in its path: buildings, vehicles, people. Panic erupted as the crowd surged in all directions, desperate to escape the encroaching void. Shouts of terror mingled with the sounds of collapsing structures and shattering glass. Those who lingered too long or were simply unlucky vanished into the fissure, pulled down by an unseen force. Their screams echoed briefly before fading into silence. Kale arrived on the scene moments later, accompanied by a team of engineers and scientists. His expression was grim, his jaw clenched tightly as he surveyed the devastation. The chasm pulsed with energy, its edges shimmering like liquid metal. Readings taken by portable scanners confirmed what he already feared. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. The fissure bore the same quantum signature as the monolith, suggesting the entity's influence had returned with a vengeance. They worked tirelessly to contain the rift, deploying experimental tech designed to stabilize dimensional disturbances. Portable containment fields were erected around the perimeter, their generators humming steadily as they attempted to counteract the anomaly's effects. But each attempt failed spectacularly. Equipment short-circuited, sending sparks flying in every direction. Generators overheated, their casings melting under the strain. Worst of all, some devices were consumed outright, vanishing into the fissure with a flash of light and a burst of static. Desperation mounted as more fissures appeared across the planet, each one larger and more volatile than the last. Entire neighborhoods were swallowed whole, leaving behind craters filled with that same eerie blue glow. Refugees poured into unaffected areas, overwhelming shelters and straining already limited resources. The council convened an emergency session, debating whether to evacuate entire cities or focus resources on sealing the breaches. Tempers flared as arguments broke out, each faction advocating for competing strategies. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens took matters into their own hands, forming volunteer groups to assist the displaced and protect what little remained of their homes. Makeshift barricades went up around fissure sites, constructed from whatever materials were available. Vigilante patrols roamed the streets, armed with scavenged weapons and determined to defend their communities. Rumors spread of individuals attempting to communicate with the entity directly, hoping to negotiate peace or at least buy time. Most dismissed these efforts as suicidal folly, but others saw them as acts of courage, however misguided. As the situation spiraled out of control, Kale found himself torn between despair and determination. He knew they couldn't fight this threat with conventional means. They needed a solution as unconventional as the problem itself. But what that solution was, and whether it would come in time, remained uncertain. Amidst the chaos, a young girl named Lyra emerged as an unexpected beacon of hope. Barely 16, she was small and unassuming, with wide eyes that seemed to hold secrets older than her years. Born into a family of farmers, she had spent most of her life tending crops alongside her parents, her existence blending seamlessly into the rhythm of rural survival. But when the fissures began appearing, everything changed for her and for everyone around her. Lyra's first warning came in the form of a migraine so intense it left her bedridden for hours. Her vision blurred, her skin prickled with goosebumps, and a low hum resonated in her ears, growing louder until it drowned out all other sounds. At first, her parents dismissed these episodes as stress-induced hallucinations, chalking them up to exhaustion or malnutrition. After all, life on Deathworld had never been easy, and the recent disasters had only added to the strain. But when Lyra accurately predicted the location of not one, but 3 consecutive fissures, their skepticism turned to awe and fear. Her predictions weren't vague or ambiguous. They were precise, down to the exact coordinates and timing. The first breach occurred near her village, swallowing a cluster of homes moments after she insisted everyone evacuate. The second struck in the heart of a bustling market district, sparing dozens of lives because she had warned local authorities hours in advance. By the third incident, word of her gift had spread far beyond her immediate community, drawing the attention of both admirers and skeptics. Some hailed her as a prophet, a chosen one sent to guide humanity through its darkest hour. Others accused her of orchestrating the fissures herself, claiming her warnings were mere coincidences designed to elevate her status. Kale, ever the pragmatist, approached her with cautious curiosity. He had heard whispers of her abilities during his travels and decided to investigate firsthand. When he met her, he found not a confident prodigy but a frightened teenager struggling to make sense of her own body. "I don't know what's happening to me," she confessed, her voice trembling. "It hurts, like something's tearing me apart from the inside." Her honesty resonated with him, reminding him of the sacrifices demanded by extraordinary circumstances. Intrigued by her potential, he invited her to join his research team. Reluctantly, she agreed, though her motives were far from altruistic. She wanted answers not just about the fissures but about herself. Under Kale's guidance, Lyra underwent rigorous testing, her abilities scrutinized under every conceivable metric. Scientists monitored her brain activity using advanced neuroimaging technology, tracking the electrical impulses that surged through her cortex whenever a fissure formed. They mapped her neural pathways, comparing them to readings taken from the obsidian monolith during the fateful encounter decades earlier. What they discovered defied explanation. Her neural patterns bore an eerie resemblance to the entity's energy signature, as though part of it had embedded itself within her. The implications were staggering. Was she a savior, a conduit for communication with the entity? Or was she a harbinger of doom, a ticking time bomb destined to unravel reality itself? Theories abounded, each more unsettling than the last. Some speculated that the entity had marked her during their trial, leaving behind a fragment of itself as insurance against future transgressions. Others believed she was evolving, her body adapting to the presence of an alien intelligence in ways no one fully understood. As the tests continued, Lyra grew increasingly withdrawn. The pain intensified with each passing day, her body racked by seizures that left her physically and emotionally drained. Yet despite her suffering, she refused to give up. She clung to the belief that understanding her connection to the entity might hold the key to stopping the fissures and saving her world. Kale watched her with a mixture of admiration and guilt, knowing full well the burden she carried. The realization sent shockwaves through the scientific community, sparking debates that spilled into public forums. Should Lyra be treated as a hero or a hazard? Could her abilities be harnessed to stabilize the planet, or would they ultimately lead to its destruction? For now, there were no answers, only questions, and the growing sense that time was running out. As fissures multiplied and widened, Deathworld teetered on the brink of collapse. Entire ecosystems collapsed overnight, replaced by barren wastelands devoid of life. Rivers once teeming with bioengineered algae dried up, leaving behind cracked beds of toxic sludge. Forests engineered to withstand acid rain crumbled into ash, their roots unable to anchor themselves in soil, destabilized by seismic activity. Refugees poured into overcrowded shelters, their faces etched with despair. Families huddled together in makeshift tents, sharing scraps of food scavenged from abandoned settlements. Children cried inconsolably, their bellies swollen with hunger. Supplies dwindled, tensions flared, and whispers of rebellion grew louder. In the cities, riots erupted as citizens clashed with enforcers over access to dwindling resources. Barricades went up around government buildings, guarded by soldiers whose loyalty wavered under the weight of public outrage. Underground networks formed, spreading pamphlets and encrypted messages calling for revolution. Some called for drastic measures, abandoning the planet entirely, seeking refuge among the stars despite the entity's restrictions. These radical voices argued that staying meant certain death, while fleeing offered at least a chance of survival. Others advocated for appeasement, believing that further provocation would only hasten their demise. Counselor Vera, now elderly but still fiercely determined, pleaded for calm. "We cannot abandon our home," she declared during a live broadcast, her voice cracking with emotion. "This is where we belong. If we leave, we lose ourselves." Her words resonated with some but fell flat with others, who accused her of clinging to outdated ideals in the face of annihilation. Meanwhile, Lyra grappled with her growing connection to the entity. Each day brought new challenges, both physical and mental. The pain intensified, manifesting as migraines so severe they left her immobilized for hours. Visions plagued her dreams, fragmented images of worlds consumed by fire and civilizations reduced to ash. She saw herself standing amidst the ruins, her hands stained with blood. Sometimes the visions felt distant, like memories of someone else's life. Other times they overwhelmed her, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. Whether these visions were warnings or prophecies remained unclear, but one thing was certain: she couldn't ignore them. With Kale's support, she devised a plan to confront the entity directly, using her unique link as a bridge. The idea was risky, reckless even, but desperation drove them forward. Kale gathered a team of scientists, engineers, and volunteers willing to risk everything for the slim chance of success. Together, they constructed a device capable of amplifying Lyra's connection, creating a stable channel through which they hoped to communicate with the entity. The risks were astronomical. Failure could mean annihilation, but doing nothing guaranteed extinction. Against overwhelming odds, they prepared for what might be their final stand. As they worked, Lyra wrestled with doubt and fear. Was she strong enough to face the entity again? Would her sacrifice save her people or doom them? For now, there were no answers, only the quiet determination to endure and to hope. The confrontation took place in the largest fissure yet, a gaping maw stretching miles wide and plunging deep into the planet's core. Its edges glowed faintly with an eerie blue light, pulsating like a living thing. The descent was harrowing. Every step felt precarious, as though the ground might collapse beneath their feet at any moment. Inside, the air shimmered with heat distortion, thick and oppressive, making it difficult to breathe even through advanced filtration systems. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably, pulling them sideways one moment and downward the next, testing the limits of their equipment and endurance. Armed with experimental devices designed to amplify Lyra's connection, the team moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing ominously in the cavernous expanse. Portable scanners emitted soft beeps, tracking fluctuations in quantum energy as they ventured deeper. The walls of the fissure were smooth and glass-like, reflecting distorted images of the team as though mocking their presence. Shadows danced erratically, cast by lights strapped to their helmets, creating illusions that played tricks on the mind. Tension hung heavy in the air, thick enough to choke on. When they reached the heart of the fissure, the entity revealed itself, not as a singular being, but as a collective consciousness comprised of countless voices. It loomed before them, its form shifting constantly, a kaleidoscope of shapes and colors too complex to process. Some saw faces within its mass, faces of loved ones long gone, faces of strangers screaming in agony, faces of creatures that defied description. Others heard whispers, overlapping and discordant, speaking in languages both familiar and alien. The sheer weight of its presence pressed down on them, forcing some to their knees. Through Lyra, it communicated its intentions. The fissures were not acts of aggression, but attempts to repair damage caused by humanity's reckless expansion. Each breach represented a thread in the tapestry of reality, frayed beyond repair by centuries of unchecked growth and exploitation. "You have unraveled what you cannot weave," it intoned, its voice resonating in their minds and bodies alike. Your survival comes at a cost, one you cannot pay. But then it offered a solution. By merging with the entity, Lyra could help mend these threads, restoring balance at the cost of her own existence. The choice was hers alone. No one could or would force her hand. Kale stepped forward, his expression torn between pride and anguish. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the hum of energy filling the chamber. "We'll find another way." Lyra shook her head, tears streaming down her face as she weighed the options. She knew there was no other way. The fissures were spreading too quickly, consuming too much. If she didn't act now, Deathworld and everything she loved would be lost forever. Her sacrifice might mean salvation for billions, but it also meant leaving behind everyone and everything she had ever known. Finally, with trembling resolve, she stepped forward, embracing the light that engulfed her. It was neither warm nor cold, neither kind nor cruel, simply vast and inevitable. As she merged with the entity, the chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light, forcing the others to shield their eyes. When the brilliance faded, Lyra was gone. Her physical form dissolved into the fabric of reality itself. When the dust settled, the fissures began to close, one by one. The ground stabilized, the air cleared, and life returned to Deathworld, slowly but surely. Rivers flowed again, forests regrew, and animals emerged from hiding, reclaiming their habitats. Refugees trickled back to their homes, rebuilding what had been lost with renewed determination. Though Lyra was gone, her sacrifice became legend, a testament to the power of selflessness and courage. Songs were written about her bravery, stories told around campfires for generations to come. Statues were erected in her honor, towering monuments that reminded future inhabitants of the price paid for their survival. And as the survivors looked to the stars, they did so not with fear, but with hope, for perhaps, in time, they might find a way to coexist with the cosmos. They had learned that survival wasn't just about strength or ingenuity. It was about compassion, cooperation, and the willingness to make sacrifices for the greater good. Subscribe now to uncover more stories of resilience, mystery, and the enduring spirit of exploration.